been a lot of controversy with National Novel Writing Month. If you haven't heard it, I'll basically just suffice to say, don't go with the actual official website. The official website has been having a lot of problems with actually monitoring their stuff and making sure that the teens and the adults can't actually interact on the same chat servers and things like that. So just don't use the official National Novel Writing Month website, because right now they're dealing with a lot of problems. But that doesn't mean you can't do National Novel Writing Month. That doesn't mean you can't write a novel in a month and just not be affiliated with their website. I've never been affiliated with their website, and I've always taken the challenge. There's no big deal with it. In my opinion, I actually think it's better to do it without a website, because of the fact that then you can make your own writing groups and you can have your own interactions that are positive. And on top of that, it makes it so that you feel more in charge of your own schedule and you don't feel quite as pressured and in the intense feelings that come with being like, oh, I'm behind. You're not behind, you're writing at your own pace. And sure, if you miss your goal, who cares? It might bother you a little bit, but no one's going to be mad at you. So, personally, I think doing it by yourself is the way to go anyway. But that being said, today we're going to be talking about how to nail the ending. Because of the fact that it's the 27th, you should be, if you are doing National Novel Writing Month, you should be wrapping up your novel, coming towards the end, the last 25 to 50 or so pages, depending on how long you're making it. Oh, don't forget, first chapter contest entries are due on the 30th. That is, let me check what that is, Thursday. They're due Thursday. However, they are due 15 minutes before we close. So as a result, either make sure you get it in before 8:45 on November 30th, or turn it in the day before. Make sure you turn your first chapter in. I would love to see a lot of first chapter entries from everyone. Turn it in by the 30th. I hope to hear from you. Alright, so how to nail the ending of your story. This is a tricky one. You might find that a lot of authors actually really struggle with endings. Why? Because a lot of us like to start stories, we hardly ever finish them. And if we do finish them, then sequels are even harder because we don't know how to end it a second time. The practice that you get is really hard. Rarely does someone ever write series after series after series before they get published, right? So most of the time people don't have a lot of practice doing endings. Endings are so crucial to having a great book, and yet the amount of practice that we have is very little. So here's some things to help improve that process. Alright. Alright. We're going to talk about try-fail cycles. Excuse me. Now, with try-fail cycles, you might think, oh, well, that's a middle, if not the beginning of the novel thing, right? True. However, the main problem is with your ending, it needs to feel earned. And if your ending does not feel earned, and you don't feel like you had these try-fail cycles displayed throughout your novel, then you're going to have a really hard time convincing the reader that you didn't just Deus Ex Machina the heck out of it. You're like, in 5 minutes she mastered her superpowers and blasted the villain away. What? No, that doesn't feel right, right? The reason why it doesn't feel right is because it's improbable. In fact, it's almost impossible. Is it entirely impossible? No, but it's basically impossible, especially if they're human. Now, if you want to say they're an alien, that's some sort of perfect race like Spock, sure. But the reason we like Spock is because he's not perfect like all the others. All the other Vulcans who are like, I'm so perfect. We like Spock because he's not perfect, actually. So that's part of the reason why they did Spock the way they did him in Star Trek. If you haven't seen Star Trek, basically just know there's an alien race that's like, I am perfect. And Spock is the epitome of not being perfect when it comes to Vulcans. And that's why we love his character. If you have a character that's perfect, it's probably just going to bother the heck out of your readers. That being said, going back to try-fail cycles, you cannot have your character be perfect. And if you have had your character be perfect, and that ending isn't earned, then just go back and fix it. So with the ending, just make sure that it feels earned. Whatever you do at the end, you need to make sure to go back and revise your story to make sure it feels earned by that ending. If it doesn't feel earned, your reader is going to be very disappointed. Now don't worry about it right now, just finish your novel, and then if you notice there's a problem with it feeling earned later, you can always go back and revise it. Revision is your best friend, because you gotta just get it out on the page. Alright. Next. Alright. And we kind of talked about this. I thought I could do shorthand, and then I realized it looked weird. We've kind of talked about this in the previous one. However, it's important that you avoid the all-powerful MC. You want to make sure that your main character has flaws, that they have issues, that they're not quite able to cast a spell right, that they're not quite able to master their superpowers. And even when they do master their superpowers, they gotta get stronger, they gotta get better, they gotta get faster, right? And sometimes they'll still fail. If you have your superhero or your main character succeeding perfectly all the time forever, that really tends to bother readers because it's not relatable. And I know a lot of my creative writing professors, one of my creative writing professors in particular, would disagree and say, well, it doesn't have to be relatable. Wrong. Actually, I would disagree with that. Your characters do have to be relatable because if they're not relatable, they're not realistic. If a character is realistic, that makes them relatable. Even if they are a villain. The reason why I say this is because we've all had those intrusive thoughts, right? That say, oh, I could just steal that thing. Oh, well, is it really that bad to steal something if you need the money for like so-and-so surgery or whatever? You know, we've all had those thoughts, and then we immediately go, nope, that's not okay. 1 second, opening the door. Hello.
Hello.
Alright. So, with endings, it is important to address the fact that you don't want your MC to be all-powerful. You need to make sure they are relatable in this regard.
What's MC? Sorry.
Main character.
Main character.
You're all good. So, with your main character, you've got to make sure that they aren't perfect. We are not perfect, and it's more relatable if your main character isn't perfect. Same thing with your villains. Oh, man. There we go. Alright. If your main character is, or your villain, is too perfect, it's not going to feel realistic, right? Let's all be real here. We're humans, we're going to make mistakes. And hey, even if there is some alien race out there that's perfect at everything, I'm sorry, the second we meet, we're going to hate them. Because they're frustrating, right? People like that who are like, oh, well, I passed the exam on the exact first try, and not only did I pass the exam, but I passed it with perfect colors, and I never even had to study. We don't like those people, right? It's frustrating. You're like,
that work?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, that doesn't actually work. Excuse you. And like, we try, we fail, and even if you do pass the exam on the first time, let's say it's some super hard entry test for a science fiction novel. You know, they have those where you're like, you have to pass the entry exam to become a rocket pilot. You know, different things like that. Even if you pass the entry exam on the first time, you're probably not going to get a perfect score, especially if you didn't study. I'm sorry. So if you're making your main character a little bit too all-powerful, you'll be able to tell, because then in the ending that you're trying to nail here, we're talking about the endings today, when you end your story, it's gonna not feel earned. And it's really important to have your ending feel earned. Your villain needs to make mistakes. Your main character needs to make mistakes. Your side characters need to make mistakes, because they're all people. And even if they aren't people, it's important that they make mistakes. I was just talking earlier about the fact that, since you guys weren't here, that with Star Trek they have a character named Spock who's from a race of people called Vulcans who are supposed to be perfect. The reason we like Spock is because he's not. He's not perfect, and we like that. We're like, you quirky little dork, we like you. Because he's relatable. He seems perfect, but he's not, is he? He makes a lot of mistakes. And so that's why we like him. And the Vulcans actually rat him out a lot for that. They're like, hey, you should have done this. And he's like, yeah, I'm aware. And the Vulcans get mad at him because he's not perfect. However, that's what makes him not an all-powerful main character. That's what makes us go, yes, we like you. If he really was perfect all the time, wouldn't it kind of be annoying? You'd be like, yes, there's perfect Spock again. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know about you, but we all have struggles, right? We all have something that we're bad at. For me, it's math. I am not good at math, I will admit it. I took as few math classes in college as possible. When I was done, I was like, huzzah, never doing that again. Unless absolutely necessary. Because I'm not good at it. And then I know other people who English is not their thing. Obviously, this is probably not your guys' struggle because you're creative writers. But I know a lot of people who are like, how the heck do you write a novel? And I'm like, I just kind of write a novel. And then they're like, but I can't even like put together a 2-paragraph essay. And I'm like, I don't know how this just does. And that's because it's a tricky thing, right?
I actually used to like not be able to come up with any sort of ideas until I started at recess. We started role playing as a friend group.
Yeah.
And that kind of like triggered my brain. I was like, oh,
For
this is
sure.
fun.
For sure. There are different things that you can have, things that help you and your brain juices flow more, things that can help you work on things. And hey, your writing is never going to be perfect. Even there are best-selling authors that are constantly talking about how, hey, if I was to rewrite the first book in my series, here's what I do. Why did they do that? Because even they realize they're not perfect. And yet we hold them up on this pedestal like, hey, their writing is perfect. Everyone has flaws, and they had an editor, right? They had an editor go over it religiously dozens of times. You didn't see the crappy draft where they misspelled their main character's name 7 times. Like, I think it's important that when you have a main character or a villain, you avoid having them be too powerful, be too perfect, because of the fact that not only are they not relatable, but then we don't feel like it's realistic, right? In reality, people make mistakes, no matter who you are, right? And so that can help your ending to feel more realistic and your readers to feel more like there's something that's won. No matter if it's a battle, no matter if it's the girl asks the guy out finally, it doesn't matter what your ending is. If your MC is perfect all the time, it is gonna make your readers feel like, oh, well, of course it worked. Whereas if they have lots of mistakes, you're like, yeah, they finally did it, right? It feels more fulfilling as an ending. All right, next one. Now, this may not make a lot of sense, but you have to leave some things undone when you finish a novel. I know a lot of people like to tie it off with a perfect, pretty little bow, but that's actually counterintuitive. I've talked to dozens of writers, dozens of editors. I've read books that are like this. I have worked on people's books that are like this. I've listened to podcasts by famous authors. Generally, the consensus is that the book is actually better if you leave some things undone. Now, not everything. You don't want to leave it on one massive thing where nothing is resolved. Like, I mean, even on cliffhangers, there's at least one thing that's resolved, right? For example, I can't use that as an example because that's a spoiler. Anyway, there are lots of novels like this.
Wait, what book series?
Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson.
The second series. But anyway, but basically, long story short, one of the books ends on a very huge cliffhanger. However, you knew that they had to get there at some point. You just didn't know how. And then they get there and you're like, oh crap, are they dead? And so that's a huge cliffhanger, right? However, you knew they were gonna get there. You just didn't know how. You just didn't know they might die. That kind of makes you kind of go, ah. So leaving things undone can actually be really good. You don't want to tie it off all with a perfect little bow. And I know some creative writing professors are like, well, if you don't tie off all the endings, how will they know it's the end?
Yeah, because it's
There's no more pages left. Exactly. It's like,
we're done after that. So.
I think we're good on that respect. But anyway, it's okay to leave things undone. It's actually encouraged to leave things undone, especially if you're not sure if you're going to do a series or not. If you're on the fence and you're like, it could be a standalone novel or it could be a series, definitely leave things undone. the worst thing that an author can do is tie off everything perfectly and then be like, book 2. And they're like, why do we need a book 2? It ended perfectly. There's no reason. But if you leave some things undone, that makes it so when book 2 comes around, people are like, yeah, we get our questions answered, all right. Instead of being like, why should I read it? They were happy. I don't want to. You're just going to ruin their happily ever after, so no. I don't know about you, but that's how I feel when people are like, there's a sequel, and I'm like, everything was fine. Why'd you go and put them in danger again? And generally, however, if you feel like, hey, the villain wasn't quite caught, but they at least escaped the villain, right? And then they have a book 2, you're like, ah, yes, we gotta figure out what happened, right? That feels a lot more intense than they killed the villain, and now the villain's back from the dead, and you're like...
You're just trying to get more money.
Exactly, at that point you're just trying to get more money. So it's important to leave things undone just in case you want to do a series, but also because you want to leave things to the reader's imagination. If you're like, here's how everything went exactly perfectly, here's how it went, exact words, then the reader tends to feel like, oh, well, I imagined it differently, and then they're disappointed.
I remember I listened to audiobook of Clementine, and then I read the book, and I saw the pictures, and I was like,
This is not how you imagined it, right? Well, yes, exactly. Leaving things and tying everything up with a perfect little bow is the similar concept, where they tie it up so perfectly that you're like, oh, well, I imagined it differently. Nah, your brain has that clash, right? Like you said, with seeing the illustrations versus just hearing the novel, it has that clash, and your brain has problems with that. So when you leave things undone, it makes it so the reader is more satisfied because they actually are able to imagine what happened. For example, if you have a male character and a female character, and you hint at the fact that they might date, but you never actually see the date, you can always have them ask them out, and then that's the end of the novel. And then you're like, oh, you get to imagine their perfect date, right? You don't have them say, and this is exactly how the date went and exactly what they said. No, it's actually better to let the reader just imagine, like, oh, this will be cute, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You had a question.
Oh, I think it's definitely it kind of reminds me of how Brandon Sanderson, in my opinion, how he explains magic systems.
Yes.
Where it's a spectrum where the more wonder, he uses that word, but
Yeah.
the more that you leave it up to the reader, the less control you, I mean, that's kind of obvious, but
Yeah.
if you want to control the ending, where there's kind of a nice sweet spot where,
If you want control, then you have to take out some of the imagination of the readers.
Right.
If you want imagination of the readers, you have to take out some of your own control. Absolutely, that was a great one. I was going to mention Brandon Sanderson with his endings, but that's an even better relation with his magic systems. Leaving things undone can actually be very important, and even if you have a hard magic system, or if you have a hard ending that you really are working towards, there are things you can leave that are undone. Whoop. For example, if you wanted to have a ending where they escape from the villain, you can make it very hardcore. They escaped from the villain. That's obvious, right? The end. However, you never say what happened to the villain afterwards. That's left undone. That's left for the reader to figure out, or for a sequel to figure out, right? So it's important to make sure that with leaving things undone, you don't leave things that are too big of a problem undone. I would say generally make sure that you at least semi-resolve it. And with a semi-resolve, it doesn't have to be massive, right? For example, there are a lot of times when, like I said, Percy Jackson, Brandon Sanderson, and others leave things on a huge cliffhanger. And you're like, oh my gosh. But then you still don't feel like it's that big of a cliffhanger, right? Because of the fact that you at least know what's happening. You just need to figure it out in the next book, the rest of what's happening. You know that X is happening, you just don't know how it's resolved, right? So it's important to make sure that you, plus, wouldn't it be a far lamer ending if they were like, oh no, here's this big cliffhanger. By the way, they're fine. Then you're like, why do I even want to read the second book? next thing. Alright, the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. You gotta make sure you have all these things. Now you wanna make sure you have all these things throughout the story, but especially in the ending. If you leave out who does what, then you have a problem. If you leave out what happens, that's a problem. If you leave out when it happens, that's a problem. If you leave out why or where it happens, those are also all problems. In order to have a ending that feels solid and feels fulfilling to your reader, you need to make sure you have all the details lined up. Do you ever wonder why the rest of the series you're like, I barely know what the Harry Potter's common room looks like they describe it once or twice maybe, but the final battle in Harry Potter, you're like, I know exactly what that looks like. And it's not just because of the movies, it's because in those last little ending pages, she makes sure to pack it full of detail. Why? Because if she didn't, you'd feel disappointed. You'd feel like, oh, that was lame. The battlefield was lame. I don't even know who did what. Wait, where did this happen? Why are they fighting Voldemort again? That would be a problem, right?
Because
but she makes sure you
are
know
focused
everything.
And must therefore die.
Right though?
But so you know everything though. Gotta make sure your readers know all the details, that you don't skip anything. And if you do skip anything, like I said at the beginning of the video, feel free to revise. Revision is your best friend. Why? Because the novel's already written. Revision is actually the easy part. It feels like the hard part, but I promise you it's the easy part. Getting the novel written is the hard part, because you can't revise something that isn't written now. So, the writing is the hard part. Once you got it written, at least now you can revise it as much as you want. If you miss where it happened and you're like, oh, this setting is super vague, fix it. Ta-da! Revision. The beauty of editing and revising your own work. It's not as complicated as people make it seem. It does feel hard, I gotta admit. Especially for your own stuff. As an editor, I feel like it's actually kind of cool because I'm like, oh, you missed a plot hole here. Let's fix that. But as an author, I can only imagine they're like, oh, I had a plot hole. It hurts, right? I know it hurts me when people are like, plot hole, and I'm like, oh. Hides. But
Ask me say, oh, frick. It's a shoot, throws out the window. Like that.
Exactly. We all have different reactions. Mine is hide and under the blankets, and yours is throw things.
Mine is taking that.
But hey, it's understandable. It's frustrating, right? It's frustrating and hard when we have other people critique our work. But it's meant to help us because of the fact that in order to really nail these endings, you gotta make sure that you have it revised succinctly. Alright, next one. I think there's supposed to be a little fancy thing. Don't go for the cliche ending, okay? It was cool the first 2 or 3 times people did it, now it's just sad. When you go for the cliche ending of, guess what? It was all a dream. Yeah, see, you can feel the tension and the reaction in the room. Everyone goes, runs off. You can tell everyone's kind of like, no, I don't like that. It feels wrong, right? Because the first time someone did it, it was like, what? Crazy reaction. Now it's like, okay, so many people have done this. Can we just be done now?
At this
That
point,
actually happens
it's
in real life.
like you're starving for an ending, and so you went through
Yes.
and so that was the best you
Yes.
could come up with. It's lazy writing.
It is ultimately lazy writing. Yes. Sure.
To me, one of my most pet peeve cliches. Sorry, am I allowed to say this?
No, you're absolutely allowed to say this. If you
I
haven't
know this
noticed,
is
I
kinda
have a
weird.
lot of interesting opinions.
It's kind of a weird tangent, but when there's a love triangle and it gets resolved by one of the people dying.
Yes!
Oh
Oh my
my
gosh,
God.
okay, I agree with you. Yes, that's on my list actually. It's
Like
literally
Les
right
Mis.
here.
Les Mis,
Oh,
I feel like
it
it's
feels
like
like a
the
cheat,
classic
right?
where
You're cheating when you do that as
you
an
are
author.
cheating. Absolutely,
You are absolutely cheating because instead of having them make a choice, you're just saying, oh, well, I guess I don't have to choose now because one of them's dead.
Look, if you want to kill one of them off, and make like reveal that that was the actual love interest.
Right, like they were gonna choose them and then they died and so now they can't choose either.
Because
That's more
then-
dramatic.
Yeah, because then it's sad and your readers are satisfied because it's sad.
Or not like Death on the Nile. where it's basically the like I'm gonna spoil this, so like
I don't even know what this is, so cool.
It's a murder mystery anyway. It could be like where there's this like love triangle, and then like
So that we have a love
person
triangle between
kills like,
Simon,
the person.
Lynette, and Jackie.
Right.
Okay.
Simon kills Lynette.
No, shush. We have Simon is married to Lynette, and left Jackie, who he was engaged to. So Jackie's salty and kind of stalking him.
Got it.
Turns out, so they find Lynette dead. Turns out Simon killed her to be with Jackie because he was in love with Jackie all along. Why he did that, I don't know. Don't mess with Lynette in the first place, but people be twisted. So
No, it's fair. See, there you go. If you're gonna kill off someone to resolve his love triangle, at least have it make
Do it
sense.
well.
And do it well, exactly. Don't just do it because you're lazy. I agree with you, Charlie. Great point.
lazy writers don't get money.
Yep, no,
Have
it's
their
true.
roles
Or
die
the
off.
sad thing is they do, and then everyone later realizes it's lazy after it's too late. I just know way too many novels that are like best-selling novels, and people are like critiquing them about how they're lazy writing, and I'm like, well, then why did you buy
If
it?
you ever want to make yourself feel good as an author, go look at like Brandon Sanderson's bad reviews.
Oh no,
Like,
it's true. Brandon Sanderson gets bad reviews. J.K. Rowling gets bad reviews. Susan Collins gets bad reviews. You can look at any
Everyone's
famous
good.
best-selling
J.R.R.
author, and they get bad reviews, and not just bad reviews, tearing into them toxic reviews where you're like, you have issues, hon. Like-
Because people are people, and sometimes people are toxic.
Yes, and they will have problems with your novel. Not everyone's gonna like your novel.
The funniest thing to do is look at bad Moby Dick reviews. There's one that's like, this insulted my uncle.
And you're like, wait,
Who's your uncle?
who's your uncle? Because this is a fictional story.
Is your uncle a whale?
Your uncle's a whale. Secretly, I'm part whale. I'm offended. Like, what? Anyway, but the point
I
is,
have
you
already
want to
offended
avoid
because I
those
once
cliche
saw a
endings.
whale.
Especially
I'm
because
so offended.
a good editor, emphasis on good editor, because there are some editors out there that aren't that great. That's okay. There's a spectrum, just like everything else. There are good things and bad things in every career. But there are some editors out there that won't catch this, but a good editor and a good publisher will see this cliche ending and go, oh no.
Fix it. It's not good.
What you do. Alright, so the next one is, for a cliche that you want to avoid, is lack of continuity. For example, they're chasing a serial killer the whole novel and then they randomly decide to forgive them. You're just sitting there squinting at the page going, did I just read that right? Yeah, exactly. That's a continuity error where you have the character...
That's like a children's show.
Exactly. That is the equivalent of a children's show. If you're writing a children's show, absolutely, go for it. Have a blast. But if you're not writing a children's show or a children's book, it's important to avoid this cliche of, hey, they're doing X goal throughout the whole novel. I'm bored. Now I want to have them do this. And it's like, just because you get bored doesn't mean they should do that. The character wouldn't realistically do that.
Unless you get bored and therefore decide to like snap whatever they're trying to like find in half, and so then now the person is dead, so they have to find another way to like fix the problem.
Or
See,
they
there you
get
go.
Because
There are
they
multiple
get
different
bored
ways
of
to do
changing
this
the
that
world, they become
avoid
mass murderers.
this problem.
Yeah. So if you're struggling with the cliche, come to me. I got you.
There are ways to fix it for sure. Okay, the last one that is ultimately a big no-no cliche is a miracle strikes down the villain. For example, you're chasing the villain the whole time, and you're like, I'm gonna get you, and you have a gun pointed to his head, and he dives in the water, and he's swimming away, and then a shark comes up and goes, no! The villain's over. The villain's done.
No,
No,
the main character
excuse
has
me?
to solve the problem.
Yes, the main character has to solve the problem. You
The
can't
main
just have
character has
miracles
to
of
man
God
up
go,
and not go
no!
begging to fate. Like, please save me. No.
Yes, there are so many problems with this.
Unless
But
the
people
shark was the main
legitimately do
character's
this.
best friend.
But people legitimately do this, don't they? Right?
Or the main character is the shark.
Or the main character is the shark, turns into shark, eats them, and see, there you go.
See,
You
your
have a full-on
last
anamorph thing going
interesting
on.
That's a
So-
completely like new superpower.
That's fair, that's fair. You would have had to have foreshadowed it before, that they can transform into animals, but they've never successfully done a shark transformation. And then all of their anxiety makes it so they can, you know, that works, that works. if you foreshadow. But if you just randomly have them turn into a shark and
One
it's been
example
realistic
probably
fiction
a
this
good
whole
thing.
time, you might have some problems there
However,
too.
that does not
How'd
sound
that
like a
work?
magic system that I would read.
That's okay, and that's okay. Like we've been talking about, everyone's gonna write a novel, right? And not everyone's gonna like it. And that's okay, right? You like different novels than I like, than you like, than you like, than she likes, that you know, it's gonna be different. For example, I'm in a creative writing class, right? And currently everyone hates my ending. I haven't had a single person say one good thing about it.
Wait, what's your ending like?
So basically, concept is zombie Cinderella, right? Well, Cinderella isn't the zombie, her parents or her dad is the zombie. Anyway, moving on. Point is that she's trying to help people realize that zombies actually aren't all that bad if you can cure them in time. And so as a result, she's trying to get to the crown prince so she can talk to him about this because the king is going to kill them all. And she's like, you don't have to kill these guys. I have the cure, I know how to fix this. You don't have to kill them all. Because her family is cured zombies. And so she's like, crap, they're gonna murder my family unless I go talk to this guy, right? And so she goes to talk to the prince, and the prince is all kind of like, you kind of sound insane. And so she kidnaps him. And then there's going to be a book 2.
You go, girl.
right? I thought it was a cool ending, especially
Yeah.
because of the fact that, like, she went to go talk to him. The goal was to talk to him. She talked to him.
I like it.
And
It
like,
didn't fix anything, so she kidnapped him.
if she kidnaps him, he can't do it. Like, he can't tell anyone to kill her family.
Was
Right,
was it
right.
foreshadowed?
What?
Was it foreshadowed?
It was foreshadowed that she was like, I will do anything to fix this, even if it means hurting the king, killing anyone. I will do anything to help my family.
Was the prince, I don't know how to say this, a character in the story before
Yeah.
this? Okay.
Yeah. So exactly. So I'm like, I feel like it was
Didn't exist purely
well
for
done.
climax? Okay.
No, yeah. I feel like it was done in such a way that it was all foreshadowed. Because I agree, if it hadn't been foreshadowed, absolutely, problems. But I tried to do my best to foreshadow, and they pretty much just told me you can't have a cliffhanger. That was their issue with it.
No.
And I'm like, you
Yeah.
can have a cliffhanger.
Let me
Cliffhangers
introduce
are
you to the
fine.
concept of a cliffhanger. It's a thing people do.
Exactly.
Basically,
So
all
it's
Basically,
like,
like almost every series
Right.
novel that
Right.
has a cliffhanger.
exactly.
one.
And so I can understand if, like Charlie said, I hadn't properly foreshadowed. Absolutely. Then I'd be on their side and be like, yeah, I screwed up. Like you said. Good point, Charlie. But at the same time, because I did foreshadow it, and I even highlighted it later and was like, what about all this foreshadowing? And they were like, I just don't like the cliffhanger, period. And so it's like, there are going to be people who don't like your novel, and that has got to be okay.
I want like a Harley Quinn size mallet, and I'm just gonna carve the word send and slap him with some sense, you know?
Just
It
boom.
is one of
Yep.
the hardest things to distinguish
Yeah,
between
see?
feedback and opinions.
Feedback and
Yeah,
opinions. Yes,
people
this is
do
a really
not-
important thing to
Oh
talk
my
about.
God, that's
Especially if any of you guys are doing the National Novel Writing Month Challenge and finishing your novel, even if you're not, this is important to know. Feedback versus opinion is really hard to tell, especially when it comes to bad editors, family reviewing it versus friends reviewing it.
Family reviewing. They're always gonna
I
say
get-
something nice. Like if
yeah,
you have a
it's
decent
tricky.
family, they're always gonna say
The
something
only
nice.
person
Right.
I can trust in my family to actually get real feedback is
Mhm.
Charlie.
See, and that's because he knows what he's doing, right? He's a writer,
Everyone
so
else
he
is
knows
just
what he's
like,
looking
yeah,
at.
it's great, and they don't say anything else. No, like I won't.
And you're like, there's this massive plot hole that you noticed but didn't tell me about. I know you noticed because I see it and it's huge.
What's
You know?
honest?
So yeah,
I'm just
it's
like-
important to find those
Well,
honest
yeah, 'cause
reviewers.
I'm mean to my little siblings just in general. So when it comes to writing, I'm slightly nicer because I'm also a writer.
Right, exactly. And it's important to have people like that. It's important to have people that are going to be honest with you. That's part of the reason why people pay editors, is because most of the time, if you give your lovely novel to your English teacher mom, I'm sorry, honey, they're going to miss some things because they're your mom.
Yeah,
and
or
they're
if you give
gonna
it to
be
your
sweet.
aunt, that's impressive whatever you do. I have one of those, and it's amazing
Yes.
for my self-esteem because it's kind of
It's great,
Sure.
but it's not so great for
Ever.
fixing
If
plot
there's-
holes
yeah.
and problems.
If there's an editor that just no matter what book they
Mhm.
get, they're just like, yeah, it's amazing. That's not.
Exactly, that's
Well,
not a good
how do
editor.
they
I
get
agree.
certified as an actual editor? That's my question.
Funnily enough, That's called scam editors. They literally do that, where they'll just say, your novel's amazing, I fixed a couple typos. That's a scam.
Yeah,
Now-
don't trust them.
Always
They
get
trust
feedback
them.
nuts.
If they don't, if they don't come up with a plot hole, then they're doing it wrong, and
Yep.
you're being scammed and run away.
Yep, exactly. If they don't have at least 4 developmental edits, you have a problem. And I gotta admit, there have been times where I've run into 1 or 2 novels that were almost perfect. You could tell that they'd had someone who was really picky and honest go over it with them, and so I only had about 4 developmental edits. That's normal. If you have someone who's genuinely really picky. If you don't have anyone look over it beforehand, and you know that those you did have look over it weren't being honest with you, then you might want to reconsider. And that's okay. There are lots of people who cause problems, unfortunately, and do their jobs better or worse. And you also have to keep in mind the fact that their sample edit may not be a good. This is a tough thing for me to say. I do free sample edits of the first 10 pages for anyone I work with who is not part of this writing group. With my free sample edits, I would say I always try to show them all that I can be, right? Now the problem is I know my limits, and so I will be all that I can be throughout that entire book. And I will make sure that I will reread it and read it again and think about it and remember those important details. But not all editors do that. A lot of editors will do a sample edit, and their sample edit will be 10 times better than their actual work because they overload themselves. So you have to be careful with that. Make sure that your editor isn't saying, oh yeah, I'm editing 20 books this month. That's when you run. They've officially overloaded themselves, and that means that they're going to burn out by the time they finish your novel, and they won't notice. I've actually had this happen before, where I've worked with people who worked with burnout editors before, and I've found dozens and dozens of mistakes, and I'm sitting here going, you paid for this? I wish I could refund you whatever you paid for this person, because of the fact that they missed things. There was one time I proofread for someone who paid a different editor to do it, and she actually had me as her editor for the second novel because she realized that as a proofreader I caught at least 3 developmental edits that she didn't even come close to catching. And that's just because of the fact that people burn themselves out. And that doesn't mean they're a bad editor. Maybe they'd be a great editor if they didn't have 20,000 clients.
Everyone's biting off more than they can chew.
Exactly. You gotta make sure that they don't bite off more than they can chew when you're going for editors. Now,
Also, don't overload yourself as an author.
yes, don't
Like, take
overload
breaks.
yourself either. Yes.
Mental health is good.
Yes.
Respect it.
Oh my gosh, yes, this is so important, especially with talking about National Novel Writing Month. A lot of people think, well, I wrote a novel in a month. Huzzah! I'm going to write a novel every month. Don't.
No,
Please don't.
no,
no.
no.
Mm-mm.
Those are not
Honey,
gonna be good
like,
novels.
please don't. Exactly. You're going to get to your second, your third, your fourth novel, and you're going to be like, and they died. I'm so tired.
Yeah, you wrote a novel in a month. Congratulations. I'm proud of you. I could never. Now go take a nap.
Exactly. Give yourself a break. Rest.
Take a nap.
It's okay.
I love how I'm like aggressively loving you guys.
Yes. No, it's important. It's important to take good care of yourself, because if you don't, your writing is going to suffer. For example, this is actually one thing that you need to take into account with publishers. Publishers tend to have deadlines for your books. You got to make sure you talk to your this is why it's important to have an agent, because your agent can help fight for you with these things.
Uh-huh.
If you don't have an agent, you got to make sure to fight for yourself. But if you do have an agent, you gotta make sure this agent fights for these things for you. For example, if you know that a year is a good amount of time for a novel, make sure your agent fights for that. Because if not, your publisher will push for whatever they think they can make money from. Even if it means burning you out. There is actually an author, I'm not going to say who had this happen, where they were my favorite book series in 7th grade and middle school. And like I found them in 7th grade and I just binged them all the way through high school. I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. Book, the last book came out, it was awful. The reason why is because they'd been forced to write a book every 6 months, and their publisher refused to do anything else. And they admitted at the book signing that I went to for that last book that they were really burnt out, and that they were really, really tired, and so they hoped that we were satisfied with the ending. And that is the only reason I was okay with it. is because I read that ending and went, you were done, weren't you? You need a break.
Yeah, no, if your publisher isn't willing to like give a little, ditch it.
Yeah, you either need to ditch the publisher or you need to have your agent go, nah, honey. Either you give us more money and we finish it faster, or we do this right and you chill.
Yeah, no,
So,
I wonder
yeah.
if, like, I wonder if I'd be good as an agent, 'cause I'm not nice to be.
I
I'm
gotta
like,
get-
agents are nice, but also like,
Agents
no,
are nice,
I-
but they're also tough. Which is,
Yeah.
I think, what you're going for is you have to be tough as nails to fight with these publishers that are saying, it's 6 months, and you're like, give them a year or else. You
No,
gotta
give
be
them a
able to
year,
stand
I
in
know
those
where you
cases.
work.
That's
You're
why
so
I
good
can't.
at that. You're so good at that.
That's why I could
I know
never
where
be
you
an
work.
agent
You're
because
my
of the fact
best
that
friend. I
I'm
know where you
good
work.
as an editor because I'm willing to do tough love in the regard that like, hey, I see where you were going here, but also this isn't quite gonna work. Whereas if I said that as an agent, they would take that as passive and be like, great, then we'll just take it. As an agent, you gotta be tough. You gotta be willing to get your skin in the game. Whereas an editor, you can just be kind of like, tough love, suck on the mushroom, you know?
Yeah.
It's a different vibe.
You can go
So for
like
sure,
that,
if
or
you
if
feel
an
like
agent has to go
if you feel like you want to be an editor, but you have more of a tough disposition, you could totally do agenting. Agenting, especially because you need that editor's mindset to know which chapters to reject and accept when you're looking for new manuscripts. So ultimately, I think that could be a potential good job for you.
Heck
if you want to.
Part-time writer, part-time agent,
That'd be cool.
part-time bad egg.
Anyway, all right. So, with distinguishing opinion from feedback, going back to our original tangent, with opinion, you'll find that most of the time there will be people who disagree. However, if you're going with feedback, you'll generally find a consensus. Now, the reason I know that my ending is okay is because I had my husband and 2 of my friends who are editors read over it, and they both disagreed with my class. All 3, I should say. Both of the editors, plus my husband, disagreed with my class. And the fact that they were like, this is perfectly acceptable, you foreshadowed it great, they just don't like cliffhangers. And that's gonna happen. However, if it is an opinion, you'll notice that. You'll notice diversity. However, if it's a feedback thing, you'll notice that you might give it to 1, 2, 3 different people. I would say generally pick 1 professional, 1 family member, and 1 semi-stranger. So it could be a classmate, whatever.
It's like
Semi-stranger.
walking down the streets in New York. Hey, you want to read my
I was
book?
gonna say semi-stranger. Don't talk to strangers. But also, if you're like, hey, this is a person I've talked to in my class, but they don't really know me well enough to be biased. Read my thing. That would help. And if all 3 of them say something, it's probably genuine feedback. Whereas if
If you have like
Oh.
version A, version C, version A and a half,
yeah, then you're like, what? Then you might notice that it might be an opinion thing. And that can happen. I actually, as an editor, try to take my own opinion and bias into account. I'll actually highlight things and I'll say like, you know, this might just be because it isn't for me, but here's what I'm thinking here. And oftentimes if I have something like that I'm worried about, I'll say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Do you want me to ask 2 or 3 other editors their opinion? Just to make sure that we have a consensus, or if it's just me. And if they say yes, then I'll go and I'll talk to my editor friends, and if we all agree, I'll be like, yeah, you really do have to fix this, it's not just me. But I try to at least think about that, because there are some things that I don't like that other people might love, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to take that into consideration. Now, not
Like,
every,
I
and now,
just-
now I will say most
like-
editors don't do that.
and
Most
then
editors will
my
just
own
say whatever,
stuff.
but.
Your thoughts versus your opinions
Yeah,
versus your beliefs.
Yeah.
My comments are like, if people
Alright.
didn't know that was my writing, they'd think I'm a jerk. Which is pretty much that, but
Alright,
Wow.
so, and hey, you never know what kind of people like what style. Some people like really blunt editors, some people like very nice editors, some people like editors like me where I'm somewhere in between. So it's important to know these things. Alright, goals. So with writing a fulfilling ending, you need to make sure that the character's goals from the beginning have been mostly resolved. For example, like with my Cinderella thing, her goal was to help her family get help at any cost, even if it meant kidnapping the crown prince. So
It's
as a
only
result,
jail
right, she'll be fine. I think as long as she she saves her family, she can be in jail forever, and she'll be fine.
No,
So-
like the same here. My family is safe. I'm good. Lock
we're,
me
we're,
up.
we're solid. Like, so she's like, if I kidnap you, convince you to fix this, it'll be fine. But that's her goal, and that's why the novel has resonance. You need to make sure that the beginning of the novel's goals and the ending of the novel resonate with each other. As this is part of where the cliche comes in. If you start the novel one way and you end it a different way, it feels cliche because it doesn't resonate. It resonates better if you're like, you start the story with them thinking about the fact that they really, I don't know, want to hunt down this serial killer because they killed their friend. And then at the end, they finally hunt them down. That's resonance, right? You feel that completion, that story arc,
Epic.
And then
right?
they don't call
It
them
feels good. So,
And that's stupid.
Yeah.
so it's important that you have it resonate with the character's goals from the beginning. All right. Eraser.
Best friend. We love the eraser.
All right. Now we're going to talk about twists, twist
Wow.
endings. With twists, it's actually really complicated because, as we just talked about with cliches, you want to make sure that it's not too twisty, or your poor reader goes, "But what was that?"
Brandon Sanders now does this really good with Mistborn,
Mhm.
because he like words the prophecy or whatever.
Yeah.
Post here because you don't want spoilers.
If you don't want spoilers, skip the next 30 seconds.
Yeah, he words the prophecy like well enough, like vaguely enough, where like you think it's this person, and it seems like no, checks out, and like all the checkpoints
Then all
are
of a
done.
sudden,
But then
boom.
book 3 happens, and you're like,
Oh,
actually,
yes.
no, it's this person that you thought, and
Yep.
it's fantastic because he does it really well.
Yes, he does it in a way that makes sense too. It's not just like it's this person and you're like, huh? It doesn't make any sense. They don't fit the profile at all. Instead, you're like, oh, duh.
Yeah,
it
and so
makes
that's what
sense.
he meant by X, Y, Z.
Yes.
Like it. So good.
Misinterpretation absolutely is something you can use as a twist, but especially with murder mysteries or prophecies. Misinterpretation of evidence that you are leaving the reader can lead to a fantastically chef's kiss twist. It just makes it really good. However, if you're doing the twist just for the sake to be like, surprise, then your reader's kind of sad. It's important to make sure you foreshadow the twist.
There's a reason people don't like Jack in the Box. And I like the restaurant. The restaurant is good, but like the toy.
Yes,
Creature
that
devil.
surprises you. There's a reason people don't like that. Is because if they were like, hey, in 6 twists, the Jack in the Box is gonna pop out, you'd feel better about it, right?
Yeah, but if it's like the one movie Elf, or
Yes.
he's doing
Randomly.
the actor didn't know when it was popping out because the producer had no button.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic because it got like a very real reaction.
Yeah.
But also don't do that to your readers.
Yes, but don't do that to your readers. That's important. So if you're gonna, I would say, you don't always have to do the classic ending either. Put your own little spin on it. Speaking of twists, put your own spin on it. For example, the story of love triangles has been told 1,000 times. The story of romances, boy meets girl, girl meets girl, whatever, they get together in the end. It happens a million times,
Person
right?
A, person B, infatuation, and then they kiss, and we're
Exactly.
like, oh, cute.
And it
you're
happens
like,
over and
romance.
over, right? Yeah, no, but that's a very classic ending, right? But the reason you may or may not like a romance, the difference is going to be whether or not they put their own spin on it. If they just do it the same way every single time, you get bored, right? But the uniqueness of the characters, the uniqueness of how they end it, the uniqueness of what they went through is going to put your own spin on it. That makes it unique. That makes it so people are like, oh, this is interesting again, instead of just this is the same story retold again and again. That's what makes the difference between a really great fairy tale retelling and a really terrible fairy tale retelling. If it's basically just, for example, if my Cinderella with zombies was basically just Cinderella has some zombies and it doesn't affect the plot at all. It just is the plot that there's zombies in the forest. You'd be like, I'm bored. But it's an integral part of her life, right? That makes it different. So similar things with classic endings, because you may not be doing a retelling, but if you have a very classic ending, like person A and person B meet and they fall in love, then make sure you have your own spin on it. Make sure you show, here's how mine's different from everyone else's story. All right. Okay. Oh gosh, just don't get stuff all over. All right, so final lines. All right. So with final lines of a story, you guys may not be on Instagram as frequently as I am because I have to advertise via Instagram in order to get editing clients. But this is a very common one where people will say, if there was a story about X, Y, and Z, what would the final line be? And they have like final line competitions. And it's fun. It's fun.
That
It's fun
sounds
to read.
like a party. Oh
It's
my
fun to
goodness.
read. It really is a party. But it's interesting because these final lines are so impactful. You barely know anything about this story, and yet you're like, that packed a punch, right? And that's important. So it's important to consider how you're going to end the novel too. You want to make sure that you don't end the novel with, and they have blue eyes. All right, I'm bored. I'm out. I don't even know why I read that book. You know?
Same. Part of me, this sounds mean, but that's a joke ending. Honestly, that
Right.
makes a joke.
Exactly. It feels like a joke when you have weird final lines. But when you
That's
have impactful final lines, where you're like, their blue eyes will forever be seared into my brain. Now that's different, right? You're like, why? Or if you've read the novel in this case, you're like, wow.
Like, checks out, but also nice word, likes that.
Right, exactly. So it's like, you gotta make sure your final line packs that punch, that it has an emotional content to it. That it has something that resonates with the reader, and the reader goes, yeah, I can see how they finished up this journey. It really kind of ties everything all together the best way that it can. All right, last but not least, talking about endings. All right. All right, I know that looks weird. There we go. Don't introduce someone new within the last 50 pages if they are plot pivotal. If they aren't plot pivotal and they're just like, we're under attack, and they immediately get eaten, you're fine. However, if you introduce someone within the last 50 pages that is like, I am here to solve all of your problems.
Yay!
Pushes
No.
glasses up on nose. No, exactly. No.
I think
Mhm.
it's too late to introduce someone. Like, what mark during the story would you say
For plot pivotal characters.
plot pivotal
Okay.
character?
For plot pivotal characters, I would say the latest you could introduce them would probably be, like, if I was to put it anywhere on this kind of little fancy scale here, this is like the last 50 pages of the novel, basically. I would say you'd want to introduce them at least here.
So
Sometime before the halfway point.
So before the
halfway.
climax.
Before the 50% mark, before the
Well,
climax.
climax is usually not the. It is like-
It's usually 3/4 mark,
Usually
kind of,
3/4, right.
give or take, depending.
Depends on the book.
Exactly, 2/3 to 3/4.
Yeah.
Somewhere it
Sometimes the
shifts.
climax is a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit closer to the end, a little bit
there's
further
lots
from the
of
end.
conflict, so there's lots of climax.
Yeah, no, for
Sorry,
sure.
that was harder
There's
than
that too.
it should be.
But yeah, so as far as that goes, you want to make sure you introduce it before the 50% mark. Now, why? Is because then you have time to get to know the character before they save the world. If they're going to be pivotal to saving your character's world, you don't want to have the character be like, I barely know this person.
It's like the shark, where it's like,
Yes, exactly.
if
It's like the
comes out
shark.
of nowhere and it solves all the problems, you're like, wait.
Why? However, like for example, there's actually a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, which I know is not the same, but it's similar because you still have a plot for Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. One of my characters, well, not my characters, but the players, one of the players has tamed a kraken. And I am fully planning on making sure there's a moment where I have identified, here's all the villain's weaknesses, please call the kraken. So that way they can have the kraken come up and eat him, and that will actually work out because it's been foreshadowed. He's been taming this kraken this whole time and developing this relationship with it. So having it help save them in the end will actually be super cool, right? Whereas if he was just suddenly like, in the last 10 seconds, I have a pet kraken. Kraken.
It's
You'd
like,
be
oh,
like,
by the way, I have this crack.
What?
I've been calling up my Twitter for the past like 30 minutes. Want me to use this? And they're like, yes, use it.
yes, use it. What was wrong with you? But if you introduce
Everything.
it before the halfway mark, then it makes it so people can adjust to that idea, and when it happens, they're all like, yeah. They're pumped up. They're excited for it. So I'd
And
say
next time
before the
someone asks
halfway
me
mark
what the heck
or
is
a
wrong
little
with you, I'm gonna
after.
say,
So
how
a
much
little
time
after
do
is
you
the
have?
absolute latest.
So-
Introduce a new character. That's
Are you talking about, is it the same with like tools where,
Yes.
I mean, a lot of the time it's like, oh, this was all for nothing, and then they're like, oh wait, but we can use this here, and we can use this here, and we
Yes.
can use
Yeah,
this
it's
here.
like those, it's like
Not
those,
for its intended purpose, but you know.
But you can use it to
it's like
defeat
those
them.
like
Yes.
children's like books or movies or something where it's like they have like superpowers or something and they never use them in scenarios that they could just end it right
Yep.
there.
Yes.
And it would
Yes.
be easy.
So it's important
Until
if you have
Plot armor.
if you have
is so
plot pivotal
freaking
stuff,
good.
it's important that you introduce the plot pivotal
Every
stuff
time I read
earlier.
something in first person, I
And
wanna
if you
kill
do
the main
introduce
character.
it, make sure you use it. Make sure you don't introduce something that's going to be useless. So, don't introduce them too late if they're plot pivotal, and if they're not plot pivotal, make sure you don't introduce them until later. Especially because then if, like you said, if they could have solved all their problems, if you introduce it like just before the ending and so they don't really know how to use it, that would explain why they didn't use it, right? Because they're like, I don't know how to do this thing, I might screw something up, I'm not going to use it, you know? For example, if they had the ability to stop time or something like that, but they knew that if they did it incorrectly, it could damage the time continuum, right? Then
I'm going
even if it could,
punch you.
yes, please stop.
Okay,
So if, for example, they had the ability to stop the time continuum, but then it could screw everything up, right? You want to make sure you don't introduce that until late in the game, so that way they're like, I'm unpracticed, I can't possibly use it. That way you explain why they don't use it, instead of just being like, you got this, girly, do it. And then they don't for whatever reason. All right, any questions that you guys have? Surprisingly, even though we went on a tangent, we ended on time. So.
That is the magic of Writers Club.
Yes,
Never
thank
mind.
you. Thank you. All right. But yes, any other questions about ending a novel? Good, bad, or otherwise? No? We're good to just free write? Talk about other stuff? All right. I will turn off the video then. Please, as a reminder, again, the first chapter contest entries are due on the 30th, which is this Thursday, and they're due 15 minutes before we close. So I highly recommend you don't wait till the last minute to get it turned in. Please, I would love to see you guys enter. It would be absolutely fantastic. It's just a first chapter, nothing crazy. It's 1,500 word minimum, 3,000 word maximum for just a first chapter, and it's due on Thursday. All right.
That